Everyone, come and see. The input shaft of the truck transmission has been broken into two halves. It is here. In order to show that the train is not pushed and the boast is not blown, the master first fixed the broken input shaft to the lathe and carefully. After Fu had clear data in his mind for reference, he then did it. Because the material of the input shaft is still very hard, it is only possible to use the gap to heat the position that needs to be cut. After the head of the input shaft is annealed to reduce the hardness, it is very easy for Fu to use the ordinary Rowan knife to cut. In order to facilitate the subsequent splicing of the broken position, the master needs to use the turning tool to cut the broken position flat. In order to ensure that the entire input shaft can remain concentric and coaxial, they also need to use twist drills to open holes. First, he will use twist drills of different sizes to open the positioning holes, and then use the turning tool to cut the inner diameter to the standard. With the master's careful processing, the next section with the master's past, the masters need to use the discarded half shaft to process it out a small cylinder to make up for the length. This section needs to be spliced with the section of the flower sword shaft. The master only needs to refer to the inner diameter ruler on the other side. Then, through the operating frame of the head shaking face, a small cylinder is cut out of the head of the half shaft. After the master has finished processing these two sections, the splicing process can be carried out. In order to improve the overall firmness, the two sections are matched with the fire shadow. The master only needs to use the small hammer to knock it into place. Then, for the splicing, it is necessary to use electric welding to perform detailed welding and fixation. In order to facilitate the use of this part to make up for the other part of the input shaft, a small cylinder needs to be cut out here. First, the master uses an ordinary thread cutter to cut the head. The master only needs to refer to the diameter of one side. The part is cut to a uniform size. For the redundant position, it is cut by a high-end cutting slot cutter. When it is cut to the point where the thread is broken, the master can knock it down. In order to improve the overall firmness of the splicing, it is also necessary to cut threads on the small cylinder on the head. During the thread processing process, the experienced master only needs to master the logic between the threads and the parameters of the lathe screw by skillfully controlling the whole cutting process. The whole process is very fast. Then you can process this input shaft. In order to use ordinary thread cutters for cutting, Fu needs to use a thread cutter to heat the head and then use the turning tool to cut the uneven position of the head. In this way, the master needs to make the end face smooth and then use the twist drill to lift the positioning hole. Gradually, in order to ensure the accuracy of the whole position, you only need to use the turning tool for detailed cutting. Fu then cuts the whole position to the appropriate position through some skilled operations. Then you can process the thread in the endoscope. After the luo, when processing is completed, you can splice the entire input shaft to the first level and then measure the length of the splicing with a caliper. After the two sections are tightened with a large pipe, you can use electric welding to weld the splicing. Because the position to be welded is relatively large, in order to prevent inclusions, the coating will be knocked for each layer of welding to prevent inclusions. The master was very rigorous and meticulous in the whole welding process. The master finished the welding very quickly. At this time, the surface was still uneven after welding, so the masters could use the lathe tool to cut and cut. After processing the surface to the appropriate size, because there is no high-end ruler washing machine in this store, the master can only take out the high-end angled die machine for cutting. The master needs to feel and control the depth. The input shaft that was broken into two halves was finally repaired after the master's concentrated operation. How many rupees should be charged for the labor after the repair?